What if I told you that some people are slowly disappearing from their own lives without anyone, not even themselves, realizing it? They wake up every morning, go through the motions, smile at the right moments, reply to every message on time, meet deadlines, fulfill obligations. On the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, there's a quiet emptiness spreading like smoke through a locked room. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It just grows, day after day, until one morning you look in the mirror and realize you don't recognize the person staring back. You're not tired because you worked too hard. You're tired because you've been pretending you're okay for far too long. Bai Huk Thang Kong, Main Chao Quy Vị và các bạn. Welcome to the place where we stop pretending and start facing what's real. If you're here, it's probably not by accident. Maybe something in you is exhausted. Maybe you've been strong for too long. Maybe you're carrying too much, smiling too often, and nobody has noticed the quiet weight crushing your spirit. Before we go deeper, take a second to subscribe to this channel. It costs you nothing, but it gives us everything we need to keep creating content that reaches deep into your story and helps you write it better, stronger, and with more truth. Let's begin. You see, there's a kind of exhaustion no doctor can diagnose. It's not about your body. It's not even about your job or your grades. It's the kind of tired that lives in your chest, right behind every forced smile and every "I'm fine." It's the ache of trying to be everything for everyone without anyone ever asking how you are. There are people out there right now, maybe you're one of them, who are trying to be responsible children, loyal friends, top performing students, supportive siblings, obedient employees, all at once. Not because they want applause, but because somewhere along the way, they believe that their worth is directly tied to how much they can carry. And so they keep carrying more and more until their knees buckle, but they still don't stop. Because stopping to them feels like weakness, feels like failure, feels like giving up. But let me ask you this: who told you that you always have to be strong? Who convinced you that resting means you're falling behind? I once sat down with a young woman who worked two jobs while studying full time. She told me, "I can't remember the last time I ate dinner without checking emails. I haven't slept 8 hours in over a year. But I can't stop. I just can't." I asked why. She looked down and whispered, "Because if I stop, everything will collapse, and I don't want to disappoint anyone." She wasn't lazy. She wasn't lacking discipline. She was just tired, not of work, but of proving her worth every single day. And the scariest part? She's not alone. There's an entire generation of young people who are quietly suffocating under invisible expectations. They carry the hopes of their families, the pressure of their peers, the judgments of social media, and the weight of a world that claps only when you're winning, but never asks if you're okay. And still, they keep smiling. They post happy photos. They say yes when they want to scream no. They offer help when they're the ones who need it. And every night, they lay in bed wondering, is this all there is to life? Just surviving? You see, the world teaches us to value resilience, but it never taught us how to rest. It praises hustle, but never explains how to heal. It idolizes strength, but forgets to remind us that strength is not about carrying everything. It's about knowing what's worth carrying in the first place. The problem isn't that people aren't trying hard enough. The problem is that they're trying to carry everything, and no one is telling them, you're allowed to set something down. If that's you, this video is not going to give you a miracle solution, but it might give you something far more powerful. A permission you didn't know you needed. The permission to pause. The permission to admit, I'm not okay. The permission to rest. To breathe. To stop performing for just a moment and see yourself again. Because how long can you keep going like this? How long until your body starts to break down? How long until your dreams feel like burdens instead of passions? How long until the people who love you start talking to a version of you that's no longer real? You don't need to crash to justify rest. You don't need to hit rock bottom to deserve a break. And you don't need to explain to anyone why you need to breathe. This isn't weakness, it's survival. And here's a truth most people don't say out loud. It's possible to be high functioning and deeply unhappy. It's possible to do everything right and still feel completely lost. It's possible to be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. That's why this conversation matters. Because if you're feeling any of this, you are not alone. And the solution isn't always push harder. Sometimes the solution is step back, recalibrate, listen, and yes, let go. Let go of the role that doesn't fit you anymore. Let go of the pressure to please everyone. Let go of the silent competition you never agreed to join. Let go of the belief that your worth is measured by your productivity. You don't have to carry all of it. Not now, not all at once, and certainly not alone. There is a different way to live, a quieter way, a way where you can be present without pretending, where you can pursue your goals without losing yourself, where success is not defined by exhaustion, but by alignment. Alignment with who you really are. In the coming parts of this series, we'll explore that way. But for now, all I want you to do is breathe. Just breathe. And ask yourself, honestly, gently, what am I carrying right now that's too heavy for me? What am I holding on to just because I'm afraid to set it down? You may not have the answer right away. That's okay. But if something in you just stirred, if some part of you just whispered, yes, that's me, then stay with me, because you're exactly where you need to be. And together, we're going to find a way to hold on to what matters and let go of what doesn't. We're just getting started. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when the weight of what you're carrying begins to shift. It's not that something suddenly crashes down. It's more like a slow realization, the kind that creeps in during a silent morning or a restless night. This is too much, not all at once. Not dramatic, just too much. And yet you keep going, because you've been taught to keep going, because stopping feels like surrender, because no one ever taught you how to put something down without feeling like a failure. But maybe the time has come, not to give up, but to give yourself permission to let go for now. There's a name for that kind of pause, that conscious release. Buông tham, translated loosely as temporary letting go. It isn't about giving up. It's not retreat. It's not about quitting your job, abandoning your family, or throwing away your goals. No, it's about choosing to release some of the pressure, to stop clenching your jaw and holding your breath through every moment of your life. It's about stepping back just enough to see clearly again. Because clarity never comes when you're suffocating. Let's be honest. Most of us are not struggling because we're lazy or undisciplined. We're struggling because we're trying to do everything for everyone all the time. And beneath that overfunctioning is a deeply rooted fear that if we let go of anything, the whole structure will collapse. We keep thinking, if I just try a little harder, I'll finally get ahead. But ahead of what? At what cost? What if the real strength is not in carrying it all, but in knowing what's worth carrying? We admire people who can multitask, juggle jobs, manage side hustles, maintain perfect bodies, nurture relationships, keep up appearances, and still reply to texts in 5 minutes. But admiration doesn't equal sustainability, and eventually something gives way. Often that something is your health, your joy, your presence, your creativity, or worse, your sense of self. You don't lose yourself in a single day. It happens in layers. You say yes to one extra obligation, then another. You take on a new task, a new expectation, a new identity. Before long, you're performing more than you're living. You're executing more than you're experiencing. And the saddest part, you think this is normal. But what's normal isn't always right, and what's expected isn't always aligned. This is where temporary letting go enters, not as a weakness, but as a form of wisdom. It is not passive. It's not something that just happens to you. It's a deliberate act of reclaiming space, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It's sitting with yourself and asking, what actually matters right now? And having the courage to say, this can wait, that can rest. I'll return to it later, stronger, clearer, more myself. Let me be clear. Buông tham doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities. It means prioritizing within them. It means choosing not to drown under the illusion that doing more is always better. Sometimes doing less is what leads you back to more presence, more depth, more intention. Imagine your energy is like a flashlight. If you shine it in 100 directions at once, none of those places will be lit up fully. But if you aim it at one thing with steadiness and clarity, suddenly that thing becomes visible, vibrant, alive. Your life works the same way. Focus brings depth, and depth creates meaning. But you cannot focus if you're spread too thin. I once worked with a young professional who was juggling 3 side projects: a full-time job, graduate school, and caring for her mother. On paper, she was impressive. To the outside world, she was doing it all. But in private, she admitted, "I feel like I'm always half showing up, half thinking, half listening, half alive." That's what happens when we confuse movement with progress, when we think action equals fulfillment. But speed without direction is chaos, and chaos, when repeated, becomes burnout. When I asked her what she'd be willing to put down for a while, she froze. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she was afraid of what people would think. And yet, the real question wasn't about people. It was about her soul, her sleep, her sanity. She eventually chose to suspend one of her projects. Not forever, just for 6 months. In that time, she regained the mental space to focus on her family, to rest, and to rediscover her love for the work she kept doing out of habit. When she returned to her paused project, it came back better than before. Because she was better. This is what letting go temporarily makes possible. It creates margin, it creates breath, it creates the possibility of being more than just productive. You get to be present. If you feel scattered, depleted, or resentful of the life you're building, it's probably not because you're doing the wrong things. It's because you're doing too many things at once. And the solution isn't always pushing harder. It's choosing smarter. It's doing fewer things better. It's giving yourself permission to pause, not forever, just long enough to recover the parts of you that got lost in the rush. So how do you begin? Not by flipping your life upside down, but by asking 3 simple questions. 1, what is essential right now? 2, what am I carrying out of fear or guilt? 3, if I had to choose one thing to fully focus on for the next 3 months, what would it be? Your answers may surprise you. They may feel uncomfortable. But discomfort often signals growth, and growth doesn't always mean more. Sometimes it means less with more intention. Remember, you are not weak for needing rest. You are not behind for wanting clarity. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You're just human. And being human means sometimes you need to put something down for now, because letting go temporarily might be the most powerful step toward becoming whole again. We often romanticize the idea of doing it all, of being multi-talented, endlessly productive, involved in everything, and constantly on the move. We admire the person who juggles 5 jobs, studies 2 degrees, leads 3 projects, volunteers on the weekends, and still manages to maintain a social life. But beneath the surface of that admiration lies a dangerous illusion. That success means stretching ourselves so thin we can no longer feel where we begin and where we end. What we don't talk about enough is what happens when you try to hold too many things at once. Not metaphorically, literally. Your mental bandwidth is finite. Your emotional capacity is real. Your time, energy, attention, they're not unlimited. But when you pretend they are, you start to fracture. Not with a bang, but with a quiet erosion. A slow fraying at the edges of your focus, your passion, your sense of identity. I've seen it happen up close. I once spoke to a young woman who was, on paper, the definition of excellence. She was working full-time, attending night classes for her master's degree, managing a small business online, and taking care of her younger sibling. When I asked her how she was doing, she smiled as if programmed and said, "I'm fine." But 5 minutes later, she burst into tears, not because something had just gone wrong, but because everything had been too much for too long. That's the danger of overcommitment. It doesn't explode, it erodes. When you take on too many roles, too many goals, too many obligations without enough space to breathe or recalibrate, you don't become better. You become blurry. You begin to lose definition. You forget what you're truly good at because you've been trying to be good enough at everything. And slowly, quietly, you begin to feel like you're not really good at anything at all. This is the paradox of overextension. The more you try to prove yourself by doing more, the more you dilute the very things that make you valuable. Excellence doesn't come from scattered energy. It comes from sustained attention, from depth, not breadth. I've met countless people who fell into this trap, thinking that more involvement equals more meaning, that more responsibilities will bring more respect. But what often happens instead is disconnection. They disconnect from the joy of the work, from their original purpose, from their own voice. They show up everywhere and end up nowhere. I remember a man in his 30s who once told me, "I've tried to start 5 businesses. I've dabbled in photography, real estate, content creation, trading, and even opened a coffee shop once." He smiled when he said it, but there was a sadness behind his eyes. "But I never stuck with any of them long enough to see what I could have become." He didn't lack ambition. He lacked clarity, and more importantly, he lacked permission to stop starting over, to choose one thing and stay, to go deep, not wide. Sometimes it's not fear of failure that makes us scatter our energy. It's fear of commitment, because commitment requires us to let go of the fantasy of doing it all. It forces us to confront our limitations, to make trade-offs, to be intentional. And for many people, especially high performers, that's terrifying. But it's also freeing. Because when you finally commit to something deeply, you stop living in the exhausting tension of almost. Almost good enough. Almost finished. Almost happy. You stop accumulating half-built bridges and start actually crossing one. One of the most damaging patterns I see in young professionals and students is what I call performance fatigue. They jump from task to task, class to job, to side hustle, to personal brand building, always chasing the next checkbox, the next opportunity. But when you ask them what they're proud of, what they've done that feels complete, they fall silent. Because nothing feels finished. Everything is always in motion, always in flux. And that constant motion, without reflection or resolution, leads not to achievement, but to burnout. This is why the concept of temporary letting go is so powerful. Not just as a recovery tactic, but as a strategy for long-term success. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop scattering your attention and instead say, "I choose this, and I choose not to do that. Not forever, but for now." It's about choosing mastery over mediocrity, choosing direction over distraction. When you give yourself permission to let go of some things, projects, roles, even dreams that no longer serve you, you create space to become truly excellent at the one thing that does matter. And in doing so, you reclaim the part of yourself that has been buried under the noise. There's a cultural myth that says the more you do, the more you are. But that's not true. The truth is, the more you align what you do with who you are, the more you become. Alignment doesn't require overextension. It requires courage, the courage to choose, to focus, to let go of what distracts you from your deeper work. I once had a friend who was passionate about languages. She wanted to speak 5 fluently, and she bounced from one to the next: English, Korean, Japanese, French, Vietnamese, always chasing the thrill of a new challenge. But after 5 years, she still couldn't hold a confident conversation in any of them. Not because she wasn't smart, but because she never stayed long enough in one place to grow roots. Imagine what could have happened if she had focused on one for 2 years. Imagine the fluency, the depth, the confidence. Sometimes, we lose so much trying to gain everything. Temporary letting go is not a weakness. It's a deliberate act of discipline. It's how you reclaim time, attention, and identity. It's how you shift from being busy to being purposeful. So if you're feeling pulled in every direction, if your calendar is full but your heart feels hollow, ask yourself, what am I trying to prove? To whom? And at what cost? What if you didn't need to prove anything? What if you gave yourself permission, not to quit, but to pause, to focus, to do fewer things better? You might just find that in choosing less, you gain more clarity, more peace, more momentum, and above all, more you. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from pressure. It lives in the pause between someone asking, "How are you?" and you replying, "I'm fine," even when you're not. It hides in the way your chest tightens when you sit down to rest, but can't. Not because you physically can't, but because something inside won't let you. That something is guilt. It's the guilt that seeps in the moment you think about saying no. The guilt that whispers, "You should be doing more," even when you've already done too much. The guilt that convinces you that resting is a sign of weakness, that slowing down means giving up, that stepping back means letting others down. But here's the truth. Rest is not irresponsible. It's not a betrayal of your ambition. It's not selfish. In fact, sometimes rest is the most responsible thing you can do for yourself, for your goals, and for the people who depend on you. Yet, guilt often wins because we don't just fear falling behind, we fear being seen as someone who can't handle everything. We fear judgment. We fear the silent glances that seem to say they're not as strong as we thought. And so we stay in motion, not because it's healthy, but because it feels safer than stopping. But safe doesn't mean sustainable. There's a difference between being dependable and being self-sacrificing, between being committed and being consumed. But in a world that glorifies nonstop productivity, that line is easily blurred, especially for those of us who have been praised our entire lives for being the one who never gives up, who can handle anything, who's always reliable. That praise becomes a prison when we believe that letting go, even temporarily, means letting everyone down. I remember speaking with someone who had been juggling a full-time job, caregiving for a sick parent, and trying to maintain a side business, all while battling anxiety. When I suggested they consider pressing pause on one of those responsibilities, their face contorted, not in disagreement, but in discomfort. If I let go, they said, what will people think of me? That I'm weak? That I gave up? Their voice shook as they added, what if I start resting and I never feel strong again? This is what guilt does. It convinces us that rest is a risk, that if we put something down, we'll never pick it back up, that if we stop performing for even a moment, we'll lose everything we've built, that the version of us who slows down is somehow less worthy, less admirable, less lovable. But let me offer another possibility. What if the version of you who slows down is actually the one who's finally being honest? Because burnout doesn't announce itself with sirens. It creeps in quietly, through forgotten joy, through forced smiles, through nights of shallow sleep and days of going through the motions. And it doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes burnout looks like excellence. It wears the mask of achievement, it performs well in meetings, it meets deadlines, and it dies silently inside. And yet, we feel guilty for wanting to rest, for needing a break, for admitting we're not okay. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that to be valuable, we must always be useful. That to be respected, we must always be strong. That to be loved, we must always show up with a smile. No one told us that being human was enough. So we carry more than we should. We say yes when we mean no. We show up when we should stay home. We give when we have nothing left. And we feel guilty for even thinking about doing anything differently. But guilt is not a compass. It's not a guide. It's a signal, one that says something in our conditioning is out of alignment with our needs. And until we challenge that conditioning, we'll continue to betray ourselves in the name of loyalty, image, and approval. It's okay to care what people think. That's human. But it's not okay to live entirely for what people think, especially when their opinions come at the cost of your health, your peace, your sense of self. Because at the end of the day, no one else has to live inside your body, your mind, your life. Only you do. And if you burn yourself out trying to protect an image, you'll lose the one thing that can't be replaced, your inner stability. I know it's hard. I know the world doesn't make it easy to stop. But let me tell you something I wish more people said out loud. You are allowed to take a step back, even when others keep going, even when no one understands. You are allowed to pause, not because you're fragile, but because you're wise enough to know your limits. You are allowed to rest, not because you're lazy, but because you refuse to be broken by the weight of constant performance. And yes, you are allowed to feel guilty and still choose rest anyway. Guilt is not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're doing something new, something your past self never felt safe enough to do. You don't have to wait until you're completely depleted to give yourself permission to breathe. You don't need a doctor's note, a crisis, or someone else's validation. Your body knows, your spirit knows, and deep down, you know. So let the guilt come, let it rise up, let it speak, but don't let it steer. Let it pass through you like a wave. And then, when it quiets down, ask yourself the question that really matters. What do I need to keep going? Not just today, but for the long run. Because if your answer includes rest, reflection, and release, then it's not selfish, it's smart, it's survival. And the people who truly matter, The ones who love you beyond your accomplishments will not love you less for choosing to take care of yourself. In fact, they might love you more because the version of you who returns from that rest will be more whole, more grounded, more you. So go ahead, rest without apology, pause without permission. Let the guilt come, but don't let it win. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a more sustainable, more truthful way to live. One where your value isn't measured by how much you endure, but by how honestly you show up for yourself. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, there comes a time when insight must become action. When all the reflection, the realization, the pain, the clarity, it must transform into something real. Not just something you think about when you're lying awake at night, but something you actually do. Because healing doesn't happen from understanding alone. Healing happens when we act on what we've finally dared to see. You've heard the stories, you've felt the weight, you've recognized yourself in the silence, the overextension, the guilt, the exhaustion. But now comes the harder part, choosing what to do with all of it, choosing to take your life back, not by overhauling everything overnight, but by practicing something radical, yet profoundly simple, discernment. Discernment is the quiet power to separate what truly matters from what merely demands your attention. It's the ability to say, this belongs to me, and that no longer does. And it's where the concept of temporary letting go becomes more than an idea. It becomes a compass, a strategy, a survival tool, a spiritual discipline. Here's where you start. Not with a massive life change, not with burning everything down, but with a pause, a real deliberate, clear-eyed pause. One where you step back from your life, just enough to see it, to lay it all out, to ask questions you've avoided not because they were too complicated, but because they were too honest. What am I doing that truly serves me? What am I holding on to because I'm afraid of what it says about me if I let it go? What would happen if I chose one thing to pour myself into, fully, completely, intentionally, just for this season? You don't need perfect answers. You need the courage to ask better questions. So write it all down. Every commitment, every responsibility, every project, task, obligation, expectation, whether internal or external. Not just your work, but your social obligations, your digital performance, your unspoken roles in relationships. Put it all on the table, and then begin the sacred work of choosing. Circle the one or two things that feel most aligned with your current capacity, your deepest values, your truest self. Don't choose based on what sounds most impressive or what others expect from you. Choose what feels most vital. What, if you gave it your full heart, could actually lead to peace, growth, and meaning. Then, this is the hard part. Identify one thing to release. Not forever, not dramatically, but intentionally. One thing that's been draining you, distracting you, stretching you thin. It could be something that once mattered deeply, but no longer fits. It could be something you've said yes to out of guilt or habit. It could even be something you love, but not enough to let it keep breaking you. Letting go temporarily is not the same as giving up. It's about honoring timing. It's about making room. It's about saying, this doesn't have to die, but it doesn't have to live on my shoulders right now either. When you do this, you'll feel something unexpected. Not immediate relief, not instant freedom, but a strange, uncomfortable quiet. The noise of the world might still roar, but inside, something will settle. A stillness, a space, a sense of alignment that says, I'm finally being honest with myself. It's in that space that you'll begin to see possibilities again. You'll have the energy to finish something with excellence instead of racing to keep up with everything halfway. You'll be able to show up with presence instead of just appearance. You'll feel less like a performer in your own life and more like a participant. And perhaps most importantly, you'll be building something rare and necessary in this age of burnout and comparison. A sustainable rhythm. The world is obsessed with hustle, with urgency, with speed, but meaning grows slowly, integrity moves quietly, wisdom waits, and you can't live wisely if you're always rushing, always reactive, always overloaded. Letting go, strategically, temporarily, is not a detour from success. It's the foundation of it, because anyone can sprint, but not everyone can last. We're not meant to run forever without stopping. We're not built to carry every dream, every expectation, every responsibility all at once. We're built for seasons, for focus, for intentionality. And the most powerful people you'll ever meet are not those who never rest. They're the ones who know when to rest, what to release, and how to return stronger. If you've been feeling lost, stuck, or stretched too thin, I invite you now, not to change everything, but to choose something. Just one thing you'll focus on, one thing you'll keep, and one thing you'll lovingly set down. This practice, repeated regularly, will transform your life. It will sharpen your clarity. It will restore your energy. It will rebuild your confidence, not in what you can endure, but in what you can choose. And when the guilt comes, let it. Let it rise and fall like a wave. But don't obey it. Don't make it your compass. Make alignment your compass. Make peace your North Star, because you were never meant to live by the expectations of everyone else. You were meant to live with courage, with depth, and with truth. You have nothing to prove. Not anymore. You've already done more than enough. Now it's time to do what's right for you, for this moment, for the future you want to step into. This is your permission to begin again, not with more pressure, but with more clarity. The version of you who emerges from this pause, who returns from this intentional letting go, will not be weaker. They will be wiser. They will be rooted. They will be free. And that freedom is what makes space for the life you were always meant to live. One breath, one boundary, one brave decision at a time. Reflection. There's a quiet kind of bravery that rarely gets celebrated in our world. It's not the kind that wins awards or makes headlines. It's the kind that shows up when no one is watching. When someone decides to step away, even briefly, from the noise, the pressure, the never-ending race, and asks themselves, what do I really need right now? We're conditioned to believe that the more we do, the more valuable we are, that success is built through nonstop hustle, constant achievement, and pushing through no matter how we feel. But what we often miss is this: doing more doesn't always lead to becoming more. In fact, it's often in the moments of stillness, when we pause, breathe, and recenter, that we reconnect with who we really are and what truly matters. Letting go temporarily isn't failure. It's wisdom. It's the courage to admit that we don't need to hold everything at once, that timing matters, that space is just as important as action. The world may tell us that we should never stop, never rest, never step back. But truthfully, the people who go the furthest are the ones who know when to move, when to wait, and when to let go. You don't have to abandon your dreams. You don't have to throw away your ambition. But you do have to protect the foundation you're building it on, your energy, your peace, your ability to show up with purpose instead of pressure. The lesson? True success isn't measured by how many things you carry. It's measured by your ability to discern which things are truly worth carrying and to release the rest without guilt. Choosing depth over distraction, choosing quality over quantity, choosing alignment over applause. How to apply this right now? Take 10 minutes today. Write down everything you're currently responsible for, mentally, emotionally, professionally. Circle the top 2 that matter most to you right now. Then, choose one thing you can let go of temporarily. It might not feel easy, but that small act of clarity could be the first step back to balance and back to yourself. If this message speaks to you, I invite you to join our Success Lesson community, where we explore truths that aren't always loud, but always life-changing. And if you want to support this journey and stay connected to future content that helps you live with more depth, presence, and purpose, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the energy to keep creating what truly matters for you and for everyone walking this path toward a more intentional life.